Good day, and welcome to Latest Answers Weekly Wrap. I'm Govinda, and we're going to go over a couple stories this week. It's a little different from normal. We're going to have two, macroeconomic stories and two tech stories. Okay, so let's start with the macro. We're going to discuss what's happening with the US Fed and the latest minutes. And also we're going to discuss developments in the relationship between Iran and the US. In the tech segment, we're going to cover firstly results from AMD, Alphabet, the parent of Google, as well as Microsoft. And then we're going to do a deep dive into Tesla and some of the latest developments with Elon Musk. Okay, so starting off with the US Fed. The US Fed came out with minutes, and basically the short of it is this. They say that they are not looking at raising rates at the moment. It's no raising likely, which is the least they could say. And then of course they talked about cuts this year, which is again if you look at the market expectations, something that they have pretty much telegraphed to the market. The market's expecting, but they say not quite as soon as the market's expecting. So they said not near term, but by the end of the year they'll be cutting rates. So what does this mean? Okay, firstly, the market expected rate cuts, expected like a 99% chance of rate cuts by the middle of this year, expect like a 50% chance of rate cuts by the first quarter. That was the expectation before the meeting. After the meeting, the chance of a rate cut by the first quarter dropped from about 50% down to about, say, 33-35% or about there. So down from a half to a third. That being said, the chance of a rate hike, a rate cut by the main meeting went up to 95%, and like I said, by the middle of the year, it's like a 99+% chance of a hike being priced in by then. Now, what does this mean? This means that the market was a bit more optimistic about rate cuts than the Fed is indicating at the moment, and this has been a trend that we've seen for a number of years. The US Fed has been indicating what their policies are going to be going forward, and yet the market has been extremely optimistic about what their cuts are going to be like, and has been continuously disappointed about them. So if you look like at the start of 2022, for instance, and look at what the forecasts were for rate cuts, the market is expecting rate cuts by the middle of 2023, reasonable chance of rate cuts by the middle of 2023. We are at the start of 2024 now. We're not going to get cuts for at least another 3 months. Well, not like another 3 months. So we're talking about some real optimism about cuts that weren't coming through. In fact, they were expecting cuts at the time the Fed was still raising rates. And this has been an expectation that we've seen continuously disappointed in terms of the expectation of rate cuts. So the idea that the Fed is going to be higher for longer is something I think that we should be comfortable with. We should be comfortable with the idea that the market's expecting, like a 99% chance of a cut by middle of the year. It's probably not as high as that. If I had to put money on it, I'd still bet on a rate cut by the middle of the year, but it's not as guaranteed as the market, I think, is expecting at the moment. And we are going to be seeing some, economic numbers coming out really soon, like US unemployment, some inflation numbers, and so on. And we have to look at those. And if we do see indications that inflation is rising, if we do see indications that the job market, for instance, is still extremely strong, I would put in, money against the idea that the expectations for the Fed cutting, are going to be as optimistic in 3 months' time as they are right now. Just my 2 cents worth on that. Next, we're looking at the US-Iran situation. I've spoken to you about this in the past, but there's been a development over the last weekend where a drone basically attacked some US servicemen. They injured like 20-something people, and they killed 3. Okay, this drone was not directly piloted by the Iranians, but was rather created by the Iranians. It was manufactured by the Iranians, and then a militia that the Iranians are associated with used that drone to attack the Americans. Now, there's obviously a separation between the two. Iranians don't attack. If you could look at the Ukrainian war, the Americans don't attack Russia, but the Americans do provide the Ukrainians with machinery that does attack Russia. So is Russia at war with the US? Not exactly, but is it exactly a neutral player? So is the US a neutral player here? No, most definitely not in the Ukraine-Russia war. In the same way, Iran didn't directly attack the US, but militia that they fund and that they supply did. Okay, or a militant group rather that they fund and supply did. Now, the US is likely to respond. I mean, in fact, just after the news broke, we saw calls for attacking Iran directly from people like Lindsey Graham, etc. It's been a pretty. The Iranians are pretty much a big boogeyman in the US. They are the big bad in the Middle East. Even after the Israeli attack on the 7th of October last year, we saw calls to attack Iran because Iran was viewed as being the sponsor of Hamas and Hezbollah, which are anti-US. And more recently, we have the Houthis attacking, shipping lanes, etc. And they are also seen to be a proxy of the Iranians. Even though they're not quite a proxy, but they definitely are supported by the Iranians. Now, what does this mean? How can the US attack? There's a couple ways they can do it. Firstly, the best way probably for global stability would be to attack the people that attack them. Not the people that made the weaponry, but the people that actually fire the rockets, the drone, whatever you're going to call it, control the drone, which is a militant group. It probably wouldn't increase tensions too much. It would be, you can even justify it in terms of, what happened. And I would say that in terms of, proportionality, even if you attacked and there were maybe like a dozen people killed as opposed to the 3 people in the US, you could say it was a proportional response, from the US's perspective. That's the one way. Then they get to a worse way they could do. They could attack the Iranians directly. Now, I say the worst way. I'm talking from the idea of global stability, not from the idea of, justice or whatever, but from the idea of global stability. If they attack the Iranians directly, they attack like an Iranian military base, or they carried out an assassination like they've done in the past, like Donald Trump did a while back when he was the president. That would be the worst scenario, but not the worst case scenario. Why? Because they've done this in the past. They've attacked and killed Iranian military personnel. They would be effectively attacking the people that attacked them in a roundabout way. It could be a deterrent. You're going to be basically attacking, or the bad people are going to attack the US. Expect you personally to be, targeted or have a chance of being targeted, and so that could be a possibility. Both these things are not going to really change the global makeup, but obviously attacking Iran versus attacking an Iranian proxy, it could increase tensions a bit, but not really changing things. And then comes to the most unstable, the worst way I would think that the response would come through. That would be attack Iranian oil facilities, the facilities that they use to produce or export oil from their country. Iran's a huge producer of oil. Still, it's down from its peak, but it's still a huge producer of oil. If they do attack Iranian facilities, this is where things get really troublesome. Why? I've talked to you about this a number of times in the past. It's about the Straits of Hormuz. Just south of Iran, there's a piece of water through which a gigantic proportion of the world's oil and natural gas gets transported through, primarily to Asia. And in fact, places like India and China are virtually dependent on these places to fulfill their energy needs. Now, if Iran is attacked and, for instance, can't export oil, maybe no one should export oil from the region. So they would be basically able to disrupt oil production from places like, Saudi Arabia, etc., to Asia. That would be incredibly disruptive to the global economic system. It would mean that China, India, the big economies of Asia would be in huge trouble. And why would the US want to do this? Well, here's the thing. The US doesn't really get any oil from this region anymore. They are basically energy independent because of their shale gas industry and the shale oil industry, etc. They produce enough locally to support their needs, and in fact, they can be exporting. In fact, one of the big stories recently was that the Biden administration stopped the facility that was going to export natural gas probably to the European Union because of environmental concerns. So the US can export natural gas, can export petroleum products, etc. It has a lot of energy. So if there was a disruption to global energy supply, guess who benefits? People that produce energy, like the US. Guess who gets hurt? People that consume energy, like the US's biggest competitor in the world at the moment, China. So you see how it all works in favor of the US. The local industry gets a boost. They hurt their biggest competitor in the world, and they also get to severely damage an enemy like Iran. And so you can see why it's tempting to assume that the US is going to be doing this. And however, if they do this, what it does do is that it creates a huge amount of tension, not just with Iran, but it creates tension with China, creates tension with India and other Asian countries. The US is facing for whatever reason, it's facing a alliance of countries that is probably the strongest alliance it's ever faced in its history. You look at who the US has faced historically as enemies, World War One, World War Two, the Cold War, etc. World War One was like, Russia versus, Russia, it was the Allies, it was against the Ottoman Empire, it was, Germany. The US came in the end. But these were European powers. They were not as big as the US, and the US was a defining player here. But the British and the French were bigger back then, relatively. In World War II, it was basically the US and the Allies against like the UK and so on, and obviously UK colonies like India and so on, Australia against Italy, Japan and Germany. If you look at those countries, Italy, Japan, and Germany, they were barely the population of the US. They had a smaller, manufacturing base in the US alone. Forget about the US allies, like for instance, the UK and its allies towards India or colonies like India and so on that were also obviously supplying labor and arms, etc., and equipment and supplies to the US and its grouping. So Germany, Japan, Italy, not comparable to the US alone. The Cold War, it was basically Russia versus the US. The Russian economy or the Soviet economy at the time, the Soviet Union, far smaller economically, far less important to the global economy, less advanced than the US, barely able to keep up. The US spending a quarter of their GDP on their army, when the US was spending a few percent, and that was unsustainable long term, and therefore they collapsed. Now compare that to the current grouping we could be talking about here. We could be talking about China, Russia, Iran, maybe even with the support of a country like India, because India would also be negatively affected by this. We're talking about a population that dwarfs the US. China alone is bigger than the US, but you have China, Iran, Russia, and then India. A different story. Even places like Pakistan would probably be against it. You're looking at places, more Asian countries would be against this than not, because it's really materially hurting their economies. We're not talking about a small disruption here. We're talking about a massive disruption to their economies. It would be almost an attack on their economies. That grouping is more powerful relative to the US than the Nazis and Japan and Italy was. Definitely more powerful than the Soviet Union was, and more powerful than the World War One coalition against the Allies was. US allies were. It's the number one manufacturing base in the world with China. It's the biggest population in the world with China and Russia and Iran and possibly India combined. It is a technological, not quite peer, but it's a technologically competent opponent. It's a bigger nuclear arsenal. Russia alone has more nukes than the US does. It has massive amounts of land and therefore natural resources. Russia alone has that. So you have a bigger population, a bigger landmass, a bigger manufacturing base, a bigger army, more powerful armaments than any other coalition the US has ever faced. So yeah, this is not a great way for the world to be going. Okay, let's move on to our text segment at the moment. So let's just start with the results. 3 big results: AMD, Microsoft. We also had Alphabet. We're going to get as I speak here, AMD has got it, but we'll get soon Meta and Amazon, etc. So for what's happened, we have Alphabet disappointing because there's income did improve, but not as much as the market expected, and so it showed some weakness in advertising, which the market was worried about. Microsoft was a bit more mixed, but reasonably good, and I think the market was more comfortable with some of the revenues coming through, which were going higher. However, they were a bit concerned about the fact that there's increased costs associated with those revenues. And then finally, AMD had disappointing results. The market was pretty negative on that. And therefore we did see it pull back as well. Google also, like I said, also Alphabet pulled back as well on the news that came out. Now, AMD is not there, but it's kind of like adjacent. But definitely Alphabet and Microsoft are part of the Magnificent Seven. These are the big 7 tech companies that have driven economic growth, or rather driven market performance over the last year or so. The fact that the best we got here was just okay, and the worst we got was pretty bad, is disappointing, and may indicate that we maybe have overdone some of the stuff around some of the big Magnificent Seven, performance of the last year. And another company in the Magnificent Seven, this is the next story, is Tesla. In fact, Tesla came with results, a little earlier, and it was pretty disappointing. In fact, the share price was down significantly from the point of those results. But that's not the only big story around Tesla. By the way, the results were showing, slowing down economic growth, and sales growth, slowing down in, forecasts for profitability, etc. Revenue was really basically flat, and okay, that could be true because of the fact that they were also cutting costs dramatically. But in terms of the outlook for Tesla, it was significantly worse than the market had been anticipating, and therefore the share price actually came down. But like I said, not the only big story on Tesla. Another big story came out this week on Tesla is that a judge in Delaware, where Tesla is incorporated, has ruled against Elon Musk's payment package. He's got a $55 billion payment package that came through from his last deal. Now, that payment package basically was based on the following idea. He set himself very optimistic targets, and if he hit those targets, he got, options. To give you an idea how big this deal was in 2021, if you added up the 200 highest paid executives, it goes in all companies in the US, the 200 together combined, that was less than Elon Musk's pay package. Okay, so it's a huge pay package, by far the largest in history. And one of the reasons the judge ruled against it was because of the size. And the second thing she ruled against it was because there's too many people on the board of Tesla that are beholden to Elon Musk. His brother, his friends, and so on are all involved in Tesla in various ways. And these people are not seen to be truly independent directors, and therefore, even though 80% of the shareholders voted yes for the package, they say the judge overruled it. Now, this is the same judge, by the way, that ruled against him for the Twitter deal. So maybe there's a bit of animosity here. Just to understand how this suit was going. A person with 9 shares of Tesla sued Elon Musk. The reason that they sued was because this is to generate legal fees for the company suing them, suing Musk. So part of this deal is going to be to pay for the legal fees of the law firm that sued Tesla, and it's going to be, trust me, they're going to be charging a lot because they'll be saying, oh, we got a $50 billion settlement here, effectively for our shareholders, for the shareholders, and so we need a percentage of that. And so it's going to be very lucrative for them. But of course, this is going to be appealed, but generally these appeals don't go well for the company. This judge has a lot of leeway in the Delaware system, and it's going against him. Now, to understand what impact this could have for Musk, he's not going to get his 56 billion or 55 billion. Which could mean a couple of things. Firstly, maybe they have to compensate him in other ways. It also could mean that he's going to move away from Delaware in terms of his incorporation. He's saying moving to Texas. That's going to be up for a vote soon. The next thing is, Musk has, even before this, has been asking for a bigger control of Tesla. He wants 25%. At one point in time, he didn't own 25% of the company, but he's since sold, he's down to about 13%. He wants a 25% voting right in that company. The reason being is he wants to build AI, and he wants to have control over AI, or at least more influence on how AI develops. And his argument is if he doesn't get control or enough control at Tesla, he'll build AI elsewhere. He has Twitter/X, as you know. Also in announcements this week, he announced the first Neuralink implant was done. Neuralink, for those that don't know, is a brain-computer interface, which is supposed to revolutionize how people interact with machines going forward. Right now, it's being used for people with disabilities. For the people that are paralyzed, that can't communicate, this will be able to interact with the computer. And the example given is someone like Stephen Hawking, who had to use a very crude, very slow machine. It took him minutes just to say one word. Now we could be basically speaking faster than I am, and I speak pretty fast, as you guys can see. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting development there. But getting back to Tesla, to a large extent, is Elon Musk. He's the face of the company. He's the reason that people buy or don't buy that car. And if you do have him stepping back and building stuff elsewhere, I think overall it'll be negative for the company, especially because of the fact that Tesla's share price can't be justified by its car sales. It has to be justified by future growth. And that future growth is going to be driven by Musk. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me. Cheers. See you next week.